Hi all, my name is Ayanda Mnikathi and the title of my presentation is the first comprehensive mapping of micro-estuaries within KZN. This project was supervised by Dr. Escott of Ezemvelo, KZN Wildlife. Okay, this is the outline that my presentation will follow. Just to give you a bit on the background, currently in South Africa there are no products that have been developed that correctly represent micro-estuaries in terms of the locations, the numbering system, the naming system, the names of estuaries and the aliases, and as well as spelling are different from one product to another. Also, these products do not display historical vegetation extents as well as back flooding zones. So, as to say in simple terms, estuaries are just polygons with a defined boundary. Okay, this has resulted in many incomplete estuarine coverages that are used in conservation assessments as well as management plans. So as to minimize these inconsistencies, our aim was to build a standard reference coverage that would be ratified by an estuarine community and using high resolution data and local knowledge. So the initial aim of this project was to map all the important features that were associated with estuaries, and that included historical vegetation boundaries as well as back flooding zone. So here I have a nice example of Ulovu estuary, which was flooded away by the 1987 floods, and the bridge was washed away. The flood heights were estimated to be more than 10 meters, which explained us using the 10-meter contour line for the outer boundary, which correctly represented the outer boundary instead of the 5-meter contour line. So it was the mapping of these important features that necessitated the mapping of micro-estuaries, because it was then when it was realized that these important features were totally overlooked while they might hold important ecological functions. So just to compare a standard estuary and a micro-estuary, a standard estuary, the obvious difference here is the size. So hence the term micro-estuary. A micro-estuary is very small compared to a typical estuary, and it does not hold all the characteristics that are used to define a standard estuary. So we do not have a formal definition of a micro-estuary yet. It still needs to be discussed with an estuarine community on our next workshop. So capturing these micro-estuaries, GPS points on which were obtained on an aerial survey that was done by John Craigie were plotted on a 2011 Spot 5 imagery where points fell into visibly open water were captured as micro-estuaries. These were classified into 4 features: a micro-estuary, micro-sip, a micro-stream, and a 100% modified system. The eastern boundary is determined by the Ezemvelo's high water mark and the western boundary by the 5-meter contour line. The mouth was also mapped to reflect the range of the movement of the mouth over the time. So all these features were mapped to keep evidence that these were taken into consideration. So for the ground truthing exercise, the tools that we needed were GPS receivers and maps for navigation and getting into sites, and GPS receivers as well as to get access points, cameras to take photographs of each and every system that we visited. Even if it was just a stormwater drain, we took a picture so that we keep evidence that we visited them. It was very difficult finding these sites due to coastal development restricting access to these sites, and also due to security reasons, in some places were too dodgy for us to go through to get to these sites. And also a sense of place survey sheet was used. This survey sheet was generated by Monique Nunes, who is an estuarine, who's doing her master's currently on estuarine systems, and was approved by Professor Guy Bates. So these survey sheets were used for rating these sites between the values of 1 and 5, 1 being the lowest value and 5 being the highest value. And they were categorized into 4 categories: recreational value, degradation, biodiversity components, and condition. The classification of these microestuaries was based on an obvious water body that was present on site, evidence of fresh water mixing with seawater, evidence of a sand dam or bar, and evidence of a natural river or stream feeding fresh water into the site from the surrounding catchment, and evidence of marine juveniles, as well as evidence of estuarine vegetation that was around the water body. So for verifying these systems, we use expert knowledge. We've already conducted workshops to verify, to get help with the system, classifying them, as well as I've mentioned Monique Nunes, who helped us with classifying these estuaries. She came with us for the ground truthing exercise, as well as Professor Guy Bates. We also used coastal area imagery dating back to the 1980s to check if the water body was present, and as well as to check the amount of development that has occurred since then and how it might have affected these systems. And we also classified the vegetation, estuarine vegetation communities that were in and around the sites. And field reports, as I have mentioned, no, I haven't. Field reports that for every classified microestuary were generated. I'll show you an example of a field report and as well as of a survey sheet as I go on. Okay, for the results, initially we mapped 189 microestuaries, and of those 119 we've ground truthed so far, and we have confirmed 39% of those as microestuaries. And just to say, this still has to be ratified by the estuarine community. Most of these systems were in poor condition due to pollution and extracts from sugarcane plantations. Some of these systems were completely dry, as you can see this one, but they still held these characteristics that I mentioned to classify an estuary. And maybe they need to be investigated in summer, because this one in particular was investigated in winter. Maybe there is a water body in summer. Okay, some were highly modified. These in particular raised a huge debate as whether to classify them as microestuaries or not, because even though at the front end they were canalized and developed, when we went back to investigate the source of these estuaries, we found out that they were in a fairly natural state. Some of these systems are very big and healthy, and we couldn't understand why these are not classified yet, and these were considered as priority for further investigation and management. So this is an example of an info sheet for each and every classified microestuary. This was generated from a field report. So it contained pictures and descriptions of sites, dominant plant species, and location maps, as well as access points. And this here is an example of the scoring sheet for the sense of survey place survey. So for recreational value kind of questions would have, will a mother let her child swim in this microestuary, or would one develop on the banks of this microestuary? And for degradation kind of questions would have, are there any signs of litter or sewage pollution? And for biodiversity components would have, any mangroves, fish or birds that are present on site? And for the condition would have, does this microestuary appear to be in a fairly natural condition? So from these survey sheets, we came up with the overall sense of place for all the confirmed microestuary. For the recreational value, we had the overall score of 3, which was quite true, as some of these estuaries were used for swimming, and we saw evidence of religious ceremonies being performed. The degradation was low compared to the rest of other features for the micro-estuaries, and for the biodiversity was also low, which made us wonder if the ecological function of these features was not important. But I think these features need to be investigated further, because there's more than there's more to these features than we think, and they might be stepping stones for estuarine ecological functions. The condition was also low, which means that rehabilitation would have to be intensive. So who would use this product? This product would inform estuarine management plans for legal requirements, and it would be used by town special planning, especially the SDFs, EMFs, and IDPs. It will inform biodiversity sector plans and regional plans, and will be considered in both terrestrial and estuarine systematic conservation assessments, and will be considered by the National Biodiversity Assessment for estuaries. The potential management implications. The national legislation requires that each and every estuary must have a management plan. And most of these systems are in a poor condition, so intensive rehabilitation would be required, which would have obvious cost implications. And the management of these systems would allow for protection of existing resources associated with estuaries and safeguard biodiversity. It will also allow for informed and sustainable decision making. So the next steps are that we have good baseline data that will be available for follow-up investigation. Also, we have not finished ground truthing these estuaries, so there are 70 more that still need to be ground truthed, including the restricted sites. And after that, we're hoping for a workshop in January with the estuarine communities for another verification process. And the final product will be included in Ezemvelo's 2011 vegetation map. I'd like to thank the following people who have been actively involved in my project, and I'll allow questions and comments now. Thank you.